Well, I think I would echo that. I think no matter what happens, whatever the outcome of this election is, that the changes in the short term would be very modest. It's possible that some of the incentives, some of the rebates that are out there could get squeezed down as part of the whole focus on the deficit, probably even a little bit likely. I think in the near term, though, the car companies aren't too stressed out about the regulations as we kind of come up to 2017. I think really for the reason you mentioned, the vehicles to meet those regulations are already in the pipeline. Now, when you get to 2017, we've had yet another election, and there is sort of a mid-cycle review that's built into the CAFE standards, and so the chances of things changing as we get towards the latter part of the decade, I think, ratchet up significantly. I just don't see a lot of pressure to kind of step back and revisit these regulations in the near term. I think the biggest threat would be really to some of the funding.
And currently, the set of policies that were approved back in 07 or 08, the tax credits, those expire in 2015, is that, at the federal level?
And they were actually initiated during a Republican administration, somewhat ironically.
But those do phase out, I guess, in a couple more years. We've got about.
So, yeah.
So just given that, if the $7,500 tax credit goes away, which is certainly very attractive for people who are looking at Volts and other models, that's 2.5 years off is not that far off. Does this begin to make it a little tougher to meet the targets that you're hoping to meet in California?
Well, we've identified in the governor's executive order plan that that's definitely a priority to look at reauthorizing at the state level and working at the federal level to make sure that we keep the incentives in place. The state incentives also expire in 2015, but there's already efforts underway to see what coalitions can be pulled together and support can be generated for reauthorizing AB 118. To keep consumer rebates available.
I think it's worth noting, though, when you look at the demographics of who's actually buying these vehicles, the affluence is remarkable. These are households that they don't need an incentive to afford an electric vehicle, and it is a little bit strange that we're offering incentives to some of the most affluent households in the state.
Right. Well, one of the things that I was not clear on for a while was people who pay the alternative minimum tax, do they actually qualify for the federal tax credit? And according to one of my colleagues in Washington, they do. That is specifically, that was added language inserted to make sure that everyone gets the ATVM credit. But I thought that to your point, I mean, you're right. It's a wealthier set of buyers right now for these products. But well, at this point, can we open it up a little bit if there are some additional questions people have? You'd like a little more detail? So right here. Do we have, I have microphones coming.
So Kevin C. from Lux Research, and the question that comes to mind that goes back, that I think was alluded to dancing around the question, and it's whether to use Costa's framework of push versus pull, whether the ZEV mandate pulls too hard in terms of trying to dictate what technologies can make it, because there's lots of innovations that can save you fuel short of zero emissions. So if you did that, there's a bucket of things to choose from. When you set the ZEV mandate, you only have, practically two choices at this stage. So you're forcing extremely disruptive innovation in both performance and cost decrease in a very short amount of time. So I'm wondering, just in terms of debating whether it's a good idea or not, essentially, to have the ZEV mandate, independent of what you do about it.
In the numbers that we're targeting for 2025, what we're looking for is a production level which brings costs down. We can slowly introduce this technology over a lot of years and pay a very high price for every car that's produced, because it'll take forever to build that market naturally. If we're mandating higher volumes, that drives production up faster, brings costs down faster, and it will cost less overall for our society to adopt the technology. I'll also push back a bit on your comment about reduced performance. The vehicles that are coming out today are meeting performance expectations. There's a change in range expectation, But it's causing a lot of people to really look at how they use their vehicles. And where we're talking a pure battery electric vehicle, those that are adopting that technology have recognized that they can make it work. For plug-in electric vehicles too, we're embarking on a fairly large study of household use of ZEV technologies, looking at plug-in vehicles, battery electrics, and fuel cells. Hopefully we'll add fuel cells to the study. Looking at the whole household and how they're operated to really understand when they're plugged in, what range is really being used, how much of the household vehicle miles traveled are electric. And that will really greatly increase our understanding of where the plug-in vehicles especially fit into the zero-emission vehicle regulation, and get at whether cost analysis of the lower range plug-in hybrids really have that much impact on the environment if you compare it to the whole household. So still much to learn there.
Whether your point on whether it pulls too hard, as Annalisa was saying, it'd be difficult to get these cars on the road in the numbers that they're going on, that they're getting out there without something like this. And I think that there's still there remains kind of a disconnect between kind of the public and the automaking community and policymakers on what the transition to something other than gasoline really is going to require, and the timing and how long it's going to take. I mean, given, like I said, vehicles remain on the road 15, 18 years, and vehicle cycles are 5 or 8 years of design. I mean, it's going to take significant numbers of purchases to change the composition of the fleet by 2050, right? So whether or not ZEV is the lowest cost mechanism, it's certainly a mechanism that is part of the innovation ecosystem. And I think it's important to kind of underscore how the technology would not be advancing at the rate it would be but for a ZEV mandate. Now it's up to the auto manufacturers to capture any technology that they might put in and costs that they might put into a ZEV compliance car and make sure that that spills over into their larger fleet. Now I think that could be a point of, and I'm not sure on whether or not the industry and California ARB have these types of discussions of whether or not the individual mandates enable their design engineers to pull some of those technologies onto their existing fleets, inverters and power electronics and start-stop assist, and those types of issues could get onto the rest of the fleet, and that would be a real benefit. Now, I'm not sure how much of that has happened. It'd be interesting to take a look at.
Could we just, Annalisa, I wonder if you could just repeat again and circle back on the numerical targets in the different phases. I know the one we're in now, it's approximately 60,000 units in the CARB states out through 2014. And then 2015 through 2017, that ballpark goal is what in terms of total numbers?
Didn't know this was going to be a test.
Yeah.
At least it's an open.
I thought it was just me that I forgot.
I can come back to that. I
Okay.
don't wanna
Well,
give
but
silence here.
where I was going with that was out through 2025. At that point, then the goal is, if I recall correctly from January, something like 1.4 million units
Right.
in total market.
Yeah.
And that is factoring in. That's not just California. That's CARB states in general.
1.5 million is California only. It is 3.5 million nationally with just CARB states, not anything which happens to be sold in Tennessee.
Okay.
This is California, Vermont, New York, Maryland, Rhode Island, Connecticut, Oregon, New Jersey, Maine, Maryland, and New Mexico. New Mexico?
All right.
They're sort of on the fence about
Just like to
implementation.
keep going back to the numbers we have up in front.
Yes, a question on life cycle greenhouse gas emissions. Before the break, you showed Dr. Samaras an interesting kind of 3 different scenarios. And I was wondering if we look not at scenarios, but actual reality today and what it might look like 2020 nationally, California. We're seeing less coal on the grid. We're seeing these RPSs. But we're also, as you pointed out, seeing efficiency improvements in the ICE. So what do the actual trade-offs look like right now, given where electric vehicles are going, and what might they look like nationally in California 2020?
Sure. Well, California has lower life cycle greenhouse gas emissions in their state than the average, but they do have a considerable amount of purchases from out of the state. So the western United States has a lower portion of greenhouse gases for electricity than the eastern half of the country. But I guess to your question is, right now, hybrids and small plug-in hybrids look better no matter where you are, right? And that depending on the electricity that you use, the three charts that I showed up were kind of the extremes. So we know we know that the answer is somewhere in the middle of there. We've also done some work it's fairly difficult to understand the life cycle impacts of electricity for my grid or for my local area. That's because of trade, it's because of time of day, season. Am I charging at 5 o'clock? Am I charging at 2 o'clock in the morning? Is it spring? So those types of issues impact what's called the marginal fuels that are used in generation. So we've done 1 million sensitivity analyses and data points around these issues, but I think the larger point remains is that the grid will have to get cleaner, so these will look better. ICEs will also get cleaner, so those will look better. And depending on your assumptions about the rate of technological change in each of those, the story pretty much looks the same, but could swing one way or the other. I hate to give a kind of an economist answer, but there's no great answer here of what looks better in 2025 because of the uncertainties involved. Now, what we can do is plan for systems that compete well under the conditions that we expect to happen. And right now, at least that would seem to look like electrified transportation with a smaller battery pack transitioning to a larger battery pack in somewhere around that time frame. But I mean, the point that shouldn't get lost is that life cycle impacts are important. Where we make batteries is important. Right? Where we make vehicles is also important. So we may not make the batteries, the fuel cells, and the vehicles in California. It's very likely that we wouldn't. Right? So that adds to the picture of the total life cycle of the vehicle.
Mike?
Hi. I was wondering, as we go forward as ways to hit the greenhouse gas emissions targets or the pollution reduction commission or targets, has it ever been considered, or has California talked about limiting registrations so that new cars, instead of just saying automakers you can't do this, say, well, we sell 1.4 million cars a year. If we don't get what we want, there will be no more cars sold after X point unless they are zero-emission vehicles.
No, we haven't considered that, but that's been sort of, but that's kind of the fear, is that if we don't achieve this through technology, we will have to achieve it through more draconian measures, that would limit drive days. We look at what other regions of the country or world have taken on. Mexico City with the odd even license plate drive days, or requirements for telecommuting, but car share or carpooling and use of public transit. I used to describe the zero emission vehicle mandate as being an alternative to limiting our driving freedoms. And so a solution through technology rather than through behavioral changes. Because we're making great progress on the smog emissions, but if we hadn't been making that progress, and if we didn't continue to make that progress, California would be unlivable. And our concerns about the effects of climate change on California from an economic and health and overall quality of life are significant enough that we take that challenge very seriously as well.